Hi YouTube, if you're wondering why I haven't posted any videos for a little while, it's because I've had to go to St Bart's Hospital to have open heart surgery. It came as a bit of a shock actually because um, about probably 4 or 5 years ago I was diagnosed with something called atrial fibrillation, which is just literally where you have a sort of a fluttering sensation in your heart. And it's not particularly serious, it's quite manageable, and I didn't really think anything more of it. And luckily, like really luckily, recently I started getting this fluttering a little bit stronger. And so I went back to my GP and he said, okay, we'll refer you for an ultrasound at Royal Surrey Hospital in Guildford. So they did the ultrasound and they said, if you just go and take a seat in the waiting area, somebody will come and talk to you in a minute. So I went and sat down, and about half an hour passed. Nobody came out, and I thought I'm gonna go and ask. And I asked, and they took me into a separate room, and they said, "Look, we're really sorry. We're not going to be able to let you go home today. Um, you need to sit down," sort of thing. So that's always a bit worrying. And they said, your aorta is supposed to be about 2 centimeters across. Yours is actually 6.9 centimeters across, um, which is really kind of dangerous. And we're going to have to keep you in and do lots of tests on you. So they did, they kept me in that day. It took me to intensive care and, rigged me up to ECG and everything. Now, it actually turned out that they'd measured my aorta 4 or 5 years ago when they diagnosed me with the atrial fibrillation. And even back then, it had been 4 centimeters, but nobody had told me at all. If they had, obviously, I would have kept an eye on it more closely. Um, but in the meantime, it had been growing, and like I say, now it was 6.9 centimeters. So one of the consultants came to see me and he said, everything's stable, your heart rate's stable, your blood pressure's stable, so we can send you home, but you'll be referred to St Bart's Hospital for surgery within 1 to 2 weeks. It actually ended up being more like 2 months before I was able to have my operation at St Bart's, but they were absolutely amazing at St Bart's. They sent cars for me to come and collect me. Even when I had to go and see the surgeon, Mr. Yap, they sent a car for me then, and they drove me home again afterwards. So absolutely brilliant care at St Bart's. So I had to have a procedure called an aortic root replacement. So if you imagine where the aorta meets the heart, right, where it actually, touches, that's the aortic root. And they had to cut away a section of my aorta and they had to replace it with synthetic tubing, basically, and also a mechanical heart valve. So I was given the option of having a non-mechanical heart valve fitted, which would have to be from a pig or a cow, I believe. Um, but they only last for I think about 10 or 15 years, and then you have to have a procedure again, so more open heart surgery, to have that replaced. So obviously I went for the mechanical valve because this should in theory last me for the whole of the rest of my life. The mechanical heart valve is made of carbon fibre, and what's quite interesting is now I've had the procedure, it makes a ticking sound. So I actually, yeah, I tick, which is quite interesting, and it's quite a strong beat as well to the heart, which is good. I mean, it's reassuring, but you can feel it constantly. And yeah, on a quiet evening, you can hear me ticking away. So in this video, I really wanted to just talk about my experiences, just to help those people, I suppose, who might be having to go through a similar procedure. Um, there were other people on my ward who were having heart bypasses and that kind of thing. But this specifically this aortic root replacement, I thought I would do this video to talk about my experiences on the ward and things, what I had to go through and what it was like. I think you may not want to hear it until you go in for your operation, but I think it would have been quite useful for me to hear of somebody else's experiences before I'd gone in, because I was really worried about a lot of things that I didn't need to be worried about. So in a way, the hardest bit is actually the waiting before the operation, because your aorta is swollen and you run the risk of it doing this thing called dissecting, which is where it kind of rips open and you have a massive heart attack. So you spend the whole time panicking that that could happen to you, and you're just really trying to kind of stay calm and just be really gentle with yourself. Don't do any heavy lifting or anything like that, and just passing time until you can get yourself into hospital. This is by far, I think, the most worrying stage. When you do get into hospital for your procedure, things happen fairly quickly, but actually, for me, it was a huge relief. To be in the hospital felt like I was in the safest place, and I'd managed not to have this aortic dissection. So, yeah, for me, it was a massive sense of relief. And I remember, obviously, having a cannula fitted in my arm, and then going in for the operation. I remember coming round after the operation, and they let me speak to my wife straight away, and I just remember the huge sense of relief that I'd survived the operation, and I was still around, and I actually felt really quite good. So the first night after the operation, I must have been on some pretty heavy drugs, because I can remember being on an intensive care ward, and there was actually a clock, which there isn't often a clock on the wards. You don't really, you can't normally tell what the time is, but I had this clock right in front of me, and I would look at this clock, and then I would fall asleep, and in my when I was asleep, it felt like I was dreaming for about maybe 3 or 4 hours, like a really long dream. And I'd wake up, and literally about 5 minutes had gone past on the clock. And that night, that happened over and over again. Like I would keep drifting off to sleep. It would keep feeling like I was sleeping for about 3 or 4 hours. And I'd keep waking up, and only 5 minutes had gone past. That night dragged on and on and on, and it felt like a week. The next day they gave me access to a morphine button, but I didn't actually feel the need to press it because I wasn't getting that much pain, and I just thought, I don't want to press this button if I don't need to. And I was told to do kind of heavy breathing exercises to try and fill my chest as much as I could, get as deep a breath. So I was doing that over and over again. But then that evening, a nurse came by and she said, "Have you been pressing your pain button?" And I said, "No, I haven't really felt the need to." And she kind of went, "Oh, just press it." And she she pressed it for me. And I thought, "Oh, okay, I see how it is." So I did end up then pressing it a few times that night, actually. But the day after that, they decided to stop my morphine completely, and they put me on codeine instead. So the main things that had been panicking me were things like drain removal, like anything that had to be kind of taken out of me after the operation. I was really quite frightened about. Mainly it's because when I was about 18 or 19, I had a jaw operation, and I had a couple of drains left in my neck. When I came round from that operation, a nurse came and she said, "I've got to just remove the drains from your neck." And she pulled this tube, which was like probably a foot and a half long or something, from my neck, and it just went like this kind of ripping sensation as she pulled this massive long tube out of my neck. and it was absolutely hideous. And I knew that there was another drain on the other side of my neck, and I just had to wait for her to deal with the first one before she pulled the second one out. And so this time I knew that I had a neck drain, at least one neck drain, and I was really panicking that it was going to be exactly the same sensation, because why wouldn't it be, you know? I'd had a neck drain before, that's what I could imagine it being like. Anyway, when they did take the neck drain out this time, there was only one, and it was really thin and really tiny, and I didn't even really feel it at all. No pain whatsoever. So that was a massive relief. I did have a couple of tubes that were also drains that went up sort of just below my sternum, and when they pulled those out, they did feel like a little ripping sensation, but because they were quite small, it happened and it is like a real kind of instant thing, instant pain and then it's gone sort of thing. So again, that was nothing to be kind of scared of, and I wish I'd have known that in advance as well. I also had a couple of tiny wires which went right up and actually connected to my heart, and they left those right up until the last minute, until I was just literally about to leave hospital. And I guess it's just in case they needed to get electricity to my heart at any point. But again, those, when they pulled those out, I hardly felt that at all. So that was a big relief when they took those out as well. So you spend the whole time kind of just sitting there worrying about them removing stuff. But then actually, when they come to remove it, it's actually fine. And you think, what was I scared of? So it's quite nice for people who are just about to go in for this operation to be able to hear this. I think it will put your mind at ease a little bit. One final thing is that you come out of the operation and they've given you a catheter. Now, um, everybody that was on the wards and things with me, they all looked a little bit worried um, when there was talk of having their catheters removed, me included. But actually, it's just a really weird sensation when they remove the catheter. It doesn't hurt. It's just a particularly weird experience. Um, and for me, actually, they removed my catheter, and then I went and sat on the loo and actually just did the biggest wee of my life. And it was just a real kind of it was a really nice experience, just a really big relief to just do this really long wee. So apart from all those sort of drain removals and things, which ended up being a lot less painful than I thought they would be, um, there were certain things like the odd blood tests here and there you have to have, or they would come round and give me small injections into my tummy, but again they were really quite painless, so nothing to worry about there either. So they move you onto different wards as you make improvements. So obviously you start off in intensive care after you've had your operation. Then they move you onto another ward, and then I finally was moved on to ward 4B, I think it was, where it was myself and three other patients sharing the ward. Um, and what I tried to do was just drink as much water as I could the whole time, and eat as much as I could as well. I just thought that obviously, if you can get all your body's systems working back as they were before as quickly as possible, you'll give yourself the best chance. So nurses do come round and say, are you drinking? Are you eating? And some of the other patients weren't able to. But I think it really is important to kind of force yourself to, because it gives you the best possible chance to kind of recover quickly. Some people, if they're really lucky, they get to leave after about 3 or 4 days. So, people on my ward, if that was the case and they ended up leaving quickly, then obviously, there would be a free space and they would get somebody else up onto the ward. So I did end up meeting a few people while I was on there. I think some of the nurses found it quite funny, like how much I was eating. Just found that I was starving the whole time, so when I got to order my food, I normally, especially breakfast, I'd order quite a bit, and yeah, it caused a few chuckles. Just a little warning about codeine, and I'm not sure if it's just the codeine on its own or if I still had other drugs left in my system. But when they put me on the codeine, that night in the ward, I looked up. It was all dark, but I could see the curtain rails, that separate each section of the ward, and the curtain rails started appearing like they were, there's LED strip lights with sort of like bright red kind of LEDs on. Um, they were like sort of asterisks, and they were moving along the curtain rails continuously. And then there were sort of little rectangular sections of neon colours as well that were also moving along all the edges of everything basically in the whole room. So it was really trippy. I mean, I've never done any drugs in my life, but it's what I would imagine um, it could be like, I suppose, to have a sort of a weird trip, like if you're on acid or something. It was most peculiar. And what's really interesting is that, the next day I said, I don't think I need the codeine anymore, and they took me off it completely. But these kind of weird trips, they happened every night after dark um, for the next sort of 3 nights. So something to be aware of. So another thing that was really good for me is that I happened to have a guy on my ward who had been a Bosnian soldier, and he basically came up from intensive care, and he sort of almost like looked like he leapt out of bed, and he kind of started walking up and down the hallways. Um, and so he was just determined to start kind of marching up and down as quickly as possible. And I was quite interested by him, like his determination. And when he left, and he left really quite quickly, I think he was gone in about 3 or 4 days. Um, I sort of said to him just before he left, how many, goes up and down the corridor did you manage to do? And he said 22. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make that my mission or my sort of aim to try and get to 22. And sure enough, on the day that I left, I'd managed to get to that target of 22 um, lengths up and down the hallway, which doesn't sound like much, but it really does kind of take it out of you. But I just thought if I can keep up with like a trained soldier, then that's a good that's a good way to go. So obviously the photograph you're looking at the moment shows the scar, and that was the scar straight after I came home from hospital. So it's actually about 2 weeks after that now, and the scar has already started to kind of heal. A lot of the, kind of scabby bits have come off. In a way, I kind of wanted the scar to be really quite kind of obvious and gnarly, because I just thought it's quite a big operation. If I'm going to go through that, you want to have a good scar to show for it. But I think actually the surgeon's done a really neat job. And what's going to happen is once all this scabby stuff has gone, it's actually going to be just a really neat line, which I'm partly glad about, but I'm sort of partly disappointed by as well. This is something that you do have to be careful about after your operation, is that you look after this wound very carefully. So mainly I've been trying to kind of keep it dry. So what I do is basically wash my whole body around it. I'm not able to have baths. I was told not to have baths because obviously, to lift yourself out of a bath, you have to push with your arms upwards, and that's really bad for your kind of sternum. So I have to kind of flannel wash myself with this kind of antibacterial soap, but you can't use antibacterial soaps in the actual wound area. So I just wash around it, like the whole of my body, and then right at the last minute, I just shower, um, not using really hot water, but just kind of warm water. I just shower down where the scar is. So you're just allowing the water to kind of roll off it. And I do that about probably 8 times, and then I just towel dry it. And you don't rub it with a towel, you just kind of gently pat it with a towel to dry it, and then you put a fresh t-shirt on each day. And that seems to be the key, just keep it dry, and don't rub any soaps or anything into the wound. So the recovery period after the operation, I think I thought it was going to kind of happen quicker, because you come out of the operation in the hospital, you start walking, and you kind of think it's going to be exponential. It's going to get faster and faster and faster, and you're going to be able to do more and more really quickly. But that's not really the case. What happens is, well, what I found is I can walk around the block, but by the time I've got around the block, I'm exhausted and breathless. Um, that's as far as I can kind of get at the moment. And so I do that a couple of times a day. And yeah, you hope that that's going to really quickly increase so that you can like walk into town or, you know, whatever. But that isn't the case. You just have to kind of just do what you can when you can and not get disappointed that you can't do more quicker. I think you just have to remember that obviously, apart from your wound, your body's trying to heal this big wound that you've got on the front of your chest. It's also healing you inside, all the bones and everything that were broken during the operation, those are all healing. And I think your body is really concentrating on that. And yeah, just the physical act of walking and things like that is a lot harder than you think it will be. I am just really looking forward to all the little things. So being able to drive again, I mean, it'll be a while yet, but that is going to be heaven. And also things like having a bath. Obviously, I can't have a bath until my scab has completely kind of healed on the front of my chest. But when I do finally get to have a bath, that is going to be absolute bliss. So remember, the hardest part of this whole thing for me was just the walking around waiting for the operation, just with this swollen aorta in my chest that could potentially dissect at any time and cause me to have a massive heart attack. So it was all of that time where I was waiting for the operation that I was kind of having the darkest thoughts and I was worried the most. And I was having the most nightmares. That was by far the worst kind of period for me. And because I'm an artist, I ended up basically just drawing any nightmares that I had and writing poems and things to go with it. So I did a series of 8 paintings. So I'll show you those in the order that I did them. It probably is worth mentioning that some of these paintings that I did could be seen as quite morbid or, um, you know, because they are quite dark in nature. So it might put some of you off looking at them, and obviously don't feel you have to. This was just my kind of personal journey and my kind of way of dealing with a lot of the nightmares that I was having. It probably is worth mentioning that this could just be an artist thing. If you think about any kind of artist that's pretty well known, they have all drawn at some point, skulls, or whether it be animal skulls or human skulls or skeletons. There's some kind of morbid fascination with death, I think. For anybody who kind of thinks about it, um, like our existence on this planet, and we've all got to die at some point. And I just think it's something that a lot of artists like to explore. So this is a painting that I did called Soul Sucking. It is an acrylic painting and it's quite big. It's done on a piece of mount board, and as you can see here, you've got a sort of a conveyor belt of corpses basically, with a sort of a wire going through all their shoulders, sort of leading them forward. And I like the perspective on this, where they're getting smaller and smaller as they go off into the distance. And then you've got all these tubes obviously sucking something from them. And, I wanted that to be like their souls being taken from each one as they go down this conveyor belt. All of these paintings that I'm going to show you are in the exact order that I painted them. So yeah, this was the first one and it was the largest one, done in acrylic. All of the others were done in watercolour, much smaller and much quicker to do. So because I was having so many nightmares around this time, where I'd kind of wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweats and it was really hideous, I thought rather than let them get to me, I'm going to draw them and maybe write a poem to go with each one. So this particular one, you can see I was in a hospital bed, and then my body was kind of floating above me, and I'm being kind of tugged in one direction by an angel and being tugged in the other direction by a demon. And yeah, this was a dream that I'd had several times. So this particular poem is called Not Be Missed. I longed my life away so many times, repeated thought midst darkest hours, yet now death's chosen standing close. My soul detached above me floats, an angel's upwards tug, a demon's down. Life will go on earth as ever, just not with me. I'll not be missed. So when I went to visit my surgeon, he told me that I had a 4% chance during the operation that I could die. And at the time, obviously, you think, well, that's really good, that's hardly anything. But then when you go away, it sort of plays on your mind. You start thinking about it more. And I think I had this kind of idea of a bag of matchsticks in my head, where if you had 100 matchsticks and you painted four of them red, um, then when you put your hand in this bag, what are the chances of picking out one of the red ones? And I think I thought about that a few times, and then I started having recurring dreams about that as well. So this particular poem is called 4%. 100 matchsticks in cloth bag, four of them painted red with blood. Fate motions me to take my pick. With trembling hand I reach within. 4 sticks of death awaiting me. Each one of them would end my time. No longer could I walk this world, see or feel or love or hug. I actually went on to think about this in a separate way as well, where if you had 25 matchsticks and one of them was painted red, it's exactly the same probability, but I don't know, there's something about, because there's fewer matchsticks, 25 matchsticks, one of them red, it just seems even more likely that you would pick that one. This was by far my creepiest dream, where I actually felt like I met death in my dream. He wasn't at all like I thought he would look. He's not sort of looking like the Grim Reaper or anything like that. It was just this guy that was particularly kind of lumpy looking, had all these kind of like marks all over his face. And I just met him in amongst all these kind of houses, really. I was walking through all of these, like a sort of labyrinth of houses. Anyway, this one's called We Met Tonight. Tonight I met death in my dreams, whilst wandering through a maze of houses. I wore elbow-length stretched gloves, him a black suit, bloated face with lesions. 4 times he appeared to me, around each corner that I turned. The certainty of who this was. I turned from him, pushing him aside. He would not cease, his face grew closer. Patterns repeat with tiny demons, fading, sudden reappearing. Death's head between my palm and wall. I push, and as his head sinks through, he disappears and I awake. Was my meeting him a sign, or will he leave me for a while? So, although this was by far the creepiest dream that I had, I sort of came away from it thinking that it was a good sign in a way, because I'd met death and I was kind of, in the dream, I was kind of pushing his face away from me, pushing his head into a wall until he sort of disappeared. So I kind of read it as a sign that maybe I was able to kind of get away from him for a while. um, and that seems to have been the case anyway, because I've survived the operation. So for me, although the operation was obviously, quite a scary thing to have to face, it was actually more the waiting that was the scariest bit. Because I had this aorta that was supposed to be 2 centimeters across and had actually stretched to more like 7 centimeters across, there was a strong chance that I could have what was called an aortic dissection, which is where the aorta just ruptures basically, and then blood is just freely pouring inside your body, and you basically are having a massive heart attack, and a very uncontrolled heart attack, which is pretty scary, and the chance of dying is basically 50-50. So I found this old-fashioned illustration of lots of different aortic problems, and so I've copied that, and I've just done a little poem to go with this, and this is called "The Last 3 Weeks." I have 3 weeks left to wait, then surgery will seal my fate. In the meantime, what is worse, my swollen heart is set to burst, and if it does, then immense pain, ripping of my largest vein. Then what of phoning 999? Doesn't mean they'll come in time. And while I'd wait, the blood flows out of my aorta all about. Still in my body, that is true, just not to places it's meant to. The chance of dying, half and half. It isn't sounding like a laugh. So yeah, I'd been told by the surgeon and by doctors as well that if you imagine a graph and you've got a very steady horizontal line, nice and flat going across, and then suddenly when it gets to your aorta being about 7 centimeters, that graph line just suddenly goes up vertically, like really straight up. So the chances of a rupture happen around that kind of time. So that is why I spent the whole time just panicking and trying to just be so careful, not to get my heart rate up, because I just really wanted to obviously avoid that aortic dissection. I did read that if you have an aortic dissection, then your chances after surgery of having more problems are greatly increased, and you have to spend a lot more time in and out of hospital having tests afterwards. So it's much better to not have the aortic dissection, and then you'll have a much kind of smoother ride after the operation. Okay, those of you that know me will know that I have a collection of really quite unusual objects. I have a sort of like cabinet of curiosities. And one of the things that I bought for myself not so long ago was actually a mummified calf. And I was looking at this mummified calf, and obviously that sets you thinking about death and things anyway. And so I decided to draw that and do a poem to go with that as well. So this is called Eternal Calf. Calf mummified, poor lifeless corpse, died after birth, chance not to live. Thou may have grown taller than me, alas, it was not meant to be. Touch not by rasping maggot mass, dried in position, thy death pose. Did thou die on arid dusty soil, baked in full sun, skin tough as leather hide? Thou shan't be heavy, solid as tree trunk, no massive head, nor fearsome horn. Thou shan't be pestered daily for thy milk, nor butchered for thy cutlets, chops and cuts. Not be beast of burden, slave to man, thou shalt not end, steel bolt through skull. Instead I painted thee this day, in hope thee may live on in some small way, and kept in cabinet of curiosity, preserved for ever, all to see. So the actual thought of the operation plays on your mind quite a bit as well. And I ended up having quite a few nightmares about this too. Just the kind of the brutal nature of the operation. I mean, it's inevitable. There's a lot of kind of heavy cutting and yeah, quite industrial tools and things used during the operation. But anyway, I wrote this poem called Torso. Please put me under, knife not soil. Make the first cut, do it soon. Straight down my chest, open me wide. You must be brutal, bones are tough. Saw through them with all your strength. then stop the beating for a while. My heart is still so you can work. Please restart it if you can. After stitching man-made parts, then wire my bones with stainless steel, and close my flesh doors, sew them shut, dress my wounds, I'll wait to scar. So this is a drawing that I did while I was at St Bart's Hospital, and this is actually the ward that I was in, and the view from my bed where you can see out of the windows. There's really nice views actually out of the windows, but this poem, I mean, I really wanted to get across that while I was staying in hospital, most of the people that I met were absolutely lovely, and obviously, especially all the nurses and everything were particularly lovely and gentle and kind. But um, there was just the odd one or two people that had had their operation, and when they came out, they just seemed really kind of ungrateful to be alive somehow, and I couldn't kind of believe it really. I couldn't get my head around that because I was feeling so sort of euphoric that I was actually alive and that I'd made it. And I just, yeah, I couldn't believe how sort of ungrateful a few people were. It might just have been, obviously because of all the medication, or it could be for any number of reasons, but it inspired me to write this poem anyway. This is called Ungrateful Man. You smoked and drank and ate too much, arteries blocked, you should have died. Instead the best have worked on you, precision job to set you back. You should be thankful, constant smile. Instead you whinge and whine and moan. Worse still, you'll smoke and drink and eat the same. They fixed you once, why not again? Rude to nurses, how can you be? Such gentle, caring, patient beings. Do you deserve this second chance? Ungrateful, most entitled man, have you no shame? Yes, I actually did a little bit of reading about this after I came out of hospital, and it does appear that quite a few people can actually get quite grumpy after they've had major open heart surgery. I actually experienced this at Guildford Hospital as well, when I was there for a couple of days, and there were some patients who they'd had sort of small heart attacks, and then they'd had to have stents fitted, and they were able to have that without, full-on open heart surgery. They just had, went up through an artery in the leg or something like that, and they were actually able to kind of get them all fixed within like an hour or two, which was just incredible. But a lot of those people were, again, heavy smokers or heavy drinkers, and I was amazed that quite a few of them were saying that they wouldn't be able to give up smoking, or they wouldn't be able to give up drinking. And the nurses were talking to them and saying, you really do need to give up smoking. And one guy was saying, well, could I not just reduce it to like 25 cigarettes a day or something? And she's like, no, you need to stop. And he just refused to do it, just wouldn't do it. It just really shocked me so much. And again, I just felt so sorry for the nurses because they're just doing their best and they're just getting all this grief. It just seemed really unfair. So I was told that I could go onto YouTube and I could actually look up my operation, and I think you can actually watch the actual type of operation that you're having or you've had. Um, I don't think I'd be brave enough to watch that before I went for the operation. Now I've had the operation, once I've healed, like I still don't think I'm brave enough now to watch an actual video of what I went through, but I would quite like to watch that after I've recovered fully. I think it takes about 3 months to recover, but yeah, my procedure was called Bentall's procedure, so I will watch that on YouTube once I've fully recovered, and I am quite looking forward to seeing what my body went through. I really hope that this video has been useful to some of you out there who might be going through similar sort of thing, like an aortic root replacement like I've had, or if you're having bypass surgery or any kind of open heart surgery really. Let me know in the comments if this has been useful to you. I hope I haven't caused anybody any unnecessary trauma thinking about anything, but what I was trying to do really was put everybody's mind at rest that actually the amount of pain and everything that you go through in the hospital following the operation is not as bad as you think it's going to be. And if it stops anybody being quite as terrified as I was when I first went in, I think that's a good thing. To my students, I would just like to apologise for obviously having to cut last term a little bit short, but I hope to start again in September, and hopefully I'll be back to full health by then. To my usual YouTube followers, I'd obviously like to apologise to you as well, because I haven't been posting any of my usual kind of videos where I do any kind of artwork or modelling or sculpting or anything like that, but I hope to resume that very quickly. This is just one of those one-off videos that kind of covers a particularly interesting traumatic period of somebody's life, and I thought it was worth doing a video on it. So yeah, thanks for watching. Check out my other YouTube videos if you get a chance. Hit subscribe to see anything that I post in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.